Massachusetts is known for its colonial history, its witches in Salem, and its coastal towns. But south of Boston lies a region that even the locals speak of in hushed tones. It is a 200-square-mile vortex of high strangeness, known as the Bridgewater Triangle. At its heart lies the Freetown-Fall River State Forest, a place cursed by the atrocities of King Philip's War and haunted by things far older than the settlers. Mark and David were seasoned hikers, the kind of guys who spent their weekends conquering the White Mountains or the Appalachian Trail. They weren't ghost hunters, they were skeptics who believed in maps, compasses, and survival skills. "It's just a forest, Dave," Mark said, adjusting the straps of his heavy rucksack. "People get lost because they're idiots who wander off the trail, not because of some Indian curse." "I'm just saying," David replied, checking his GPS. "The signal is already weird. It says we're 3 miles east of where we parked, but we've only been walking for 20 minutes. They were hiking the Ledge Trail, a rocky path that wound through the dense pine and oak woods of Freetown. It was late afternoon in November. The air was crisp and smelled of decaying leaves and pine sap. "Let's make camp near the Assonet Ledge," Mark suggested. "Great view from the top." The Assonet Ledge is a massive granite outcropping that drops 80 feet into a water-filled quarry. It is beautiful, but it has a dark reputation. People claim to feel an overwhelming urge to jump when they stand near the edge. As they hiked deeper, the forest changed. The trees became gnarled, their branches twisting into unnatural shapes. The silence was profound. There were no birds, no wind, just the crunch of their boots on the gravel. "Did you see that?" David stopped suddenly. "See what?" "Something small, darting between the rocks, like a gray porcupine or something, but it stood up." "Probably a raccoon or your imagination. You've been reading too many Reddit threads about this place." They reached the ledge just as the sun began to set. The view was breathtaking, a sea of autumn trees stretching to the horizon. But looking down into the quarry water, the reflection of the sky seemed wrong. The water was black, swallowing the light. They set up their tent in a small clearing back from the cliff edge. They built a fire, ate their dehydrated meals, and talked about work. Around 9 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. It started with a smell, the scent of burning flowers. It was sweet, sickly, and completely out of place in a November forest. "Who's burning incense out here?" Mark asked, sniffing the air. "I don't know," David said, shining his flashlight into the woods, "but look at the fire." Their campfire, which had been burning bright orange, was now sputtering. The flames had turned a distinct, vibrant blue. "That's chemical," Mark said, frowning. "Is there something in the wood?" "Mark," David whispered, his voice tight with fear. "Look at the trees." Mark turned. At the edge of the firelight, peeking out from behind the trunks of the oak trees, were faces. They weren't human. They were small, gray-skinned, with large noses and ears. Their eyes glowed a faint yellow. They stood about 2 or 3 feet tall. "What the hell are those?" Mark stood up, grabbing his hatchet. "Raccoons?" One of the creatures stepped fully into the light. It wore a loincloth made of animal hide, and in its hand it held a small bow. "Those aren't animals," David said, backing away. "Those are Pukwudgies." "Pukwudgies? Stop messing around." The creature raised its bow. It didn't fire an arrow. It fired a small ball of light, a glowing orb that zipped through the air like a firefly on steroids. The orb hit Mark in the chest. He expected pain. Instead, he felt a wave of dizziness. His knees buckled. "Mark!" David rushed to him. "I'm fine," Mark slurred, shaking his head. "Just dizzy. I feel like I need to walk." "Walk where?" Mark pointed toward the cliff edge. "To the ledge. The little guys, they want to show me something." David grabbed Mark's jacket and yanked him back. "You aren't going anywhere. Sit down." He looked back at the tree line. The creatures were gone, but the woods were alive with giggling. It was a high-pitched, childlike laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the ground, from the branches, from the air itself. "We need to leave," David said, kicking dirt onto the blue fire. "Pack up, now." "But they're friendly," Mark mumbled, his eyes glazed over. "They're just playing." "They are not friendly," David yelled. "The lore says they lure people off cliffs. Snap out of it." He slapped Mark across the face, hard. Mark blinked, shaking his head. The daze seemed to lift slightly. "What? Why did you hit me?" "The Pukwudgies. They drugged you or something. We're moving out." They abandoned the tent. David grabbed their packs and his heavy flashlight. He grabbed Mark's arm and steered him toward the trail. But the trail was gone. Where the path should have been, there was now a wall of thick, thorny briars that stretched as high as their heads. "This is impossible," David said, shining the light. "We walked up this way an hour ago." "Giggle! Giggle!" A small rock flew out of the darkness and hit David in the shoulder. Then another hit his leg. "They're hurting us," David realized. "They blocked the path to force us the other way." "Which way?" Mark asked, rubbing his eyes. David looked at his compass. The needle was spinning wildly, ignoring magnetic north. He looked at the only open path. It led deeper into the woods, away from the ledge, but toward the swampy interior of the triangle, known as the Hockomock Swamp. "We don't have a choice," David said. "Move." They ran. The forest seemed to shift around them. Trees appeared to move closer when they weren't looking. The ground became soft and boggy. Suddenly, a ball of blue fire appeared in front of them, hovering in the air. It bobbed up and down like a lantern being held by an invisible hand. "Don't follow the light," David warned. "That's how people disappear." The ball of fire zipped to the left. David pulled Mark to the right. "Why are they doing this?" Mark panted. He was sweating profusely, the effects of the magic still in his system. "They are not friendly," David yelled. "They hate humans. We're trespassing in their home." They stumbled into a clearing filled with strange stone mounds. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a petroglyph site, potentially ancient Wampanoag markers. Standing atop the largest mound was a figure. It wasn't a small Pukwudgie this time. It was a shadow figure, tall, blacker than the night, with no discernible features. It radiated pure malice. "The spirits of the forest," Mark whispered. "The triangle wakes them up." The shadow figure pointed a long, dark finger toward Mark. Mark screamed. He clutched his chest. "It burns! It burns!" He ripped open his jacket. On his chest, where the orb of light had hit him earlier, the skin was turning black. The blackness was spreading like veins of ink under his skin. "Help me!" Mark cried, falling to his knees. David looked around frantically. The Pukwudgies were emerging from the shadows again, dozens of them. They were circling the clearing, their yellow eyes glowing. They held small spears now. They weren't giggling anymore. They were hissing. David realized they weren't trying to kill them instantly. They were playing a game, a hunt. "Get up, Mark!" David hauled his friend to his feet. "If we stay here, we die." "Where do we go?" Mark wept. "There's nowhere to go." David saw a rocky incline to their right. "Up there, high ground." They scrambled up the rocks. The Pukwudgies didn't follow them up the steep slope. They stayed below, watching, waiting. David and Mark reached the top of the rise. They collapsed, gasping for air. "They stopped," Mark whispered. "Why did they stop?" David shone his flashlight around. They were on a flat plateau of rock. He walked to the edge to look down. His stomach dropped. They weren't on a hill. They were back at the Assonet ledge. The creatures had herded them in a giant circle. They had manipulated the forest, the path, and their minds to bring them right back to the edge of the 80-foot drop. David spun around. The briar wall had appeared behind them again, blocking their retreat from the cliff edge. They were trapped on a strip of rock 10 feet wide. Below, in the quarry, the black water waited. "They want us to jump," Mark said, his voice strangely calm now. He stood up and walked toward the edge. "Mark, stop!" David lunged for him. "It's peaceful down there, Dave. Can't you hear them calling? Nobody is calling! David grabbed Mark's belt and yanked him back. Mark fought him, scratching and clawing with surprising strength. Let me go! Mark screamed, his eyes completely black now. No whites, no irises, just the void. I belong to the triangle now! Suddenly, a strong wind kicked up, but it wasn't wind, it was a suction, pulling them toward the edge. From the tree line behind the briars, the Pukwudgies began to chant. It was low, rhythmic drumming sound made by beating their small fists against the tree trunks. Thump, thump, thump. And then it appeared. Rising from the quarry water below, hovering up past the cliff face, was a massive ball of light. It wasn't blue like the others. It was red, blood red. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The light washed over the cliff, illuminating David and Mark. David felt a sudden, overwhelming despair. He remembered every failure in his life, every regret. The urge to just step off the ledge and end the noise was overpowering. Just step off, a voice whispered in his ear. Fly. David fell to his knees, sobbing. He crawled toward the edge. He couldn't help it. His body was obeying the voice. Mark was already standing on the precipice, his toes hanging over the void. Mark! David choked out. Fight it! Mark turned to look at David. He smiled, but it wasn't Mark's smile. It was a twisted, cruel grin. You aren't welcome here, Mark said in a voice that sounded like grinding stones. Then Mark leaned back, but he didn't fall. Something grabbed him, not David. A shadowy hand made of the same darkness they had seen earlier shot out from the trees, but this time it seemed protective or perhaps possessive. The shadow figure from the clearing was standing among the Pukwudgies. It raised a hand and the red orb in the quarry exploded into sparks. The spell broke. Mark collapsed backward onto the rock, gasping, his eyes returning to normal. David felt the despair lift, replaced by pure terror. The Pukwudgies hissed in anger. They threw their spears, but the shadow figure swiped its arm and the spears turned to dust mid-air. The shadow figure walked toward the cliff. It didn't look at the humans. It looked down into the quarry, asserting dominance over whatever lived in the water. Then it turned to David and Mark. It had no face, but David felt a clear command in his mind. Leave. The briar wall behind them withered and died in seconds, opening the path back to the main road. Go! David grabbed Mark, who was barely conscious. They ran. They didn't look back at the shadow or the little demons. They ran until their lungs burned, until the soles of their boots were worn thin. They burst out of the tree line onto Slab Bridge Road just as the sun began to rise. A passing state trooper saw them, two grown men covered in dirt, clothes torn, prying on the side of the road. Mark spent a week in the hospital. The doctors couldn't explain the black necrosis on his chest. They treated it as a severe fungal infection, but the scar it left looks exactly like a small handprint. David never went hiking again. He moved to the city, far away from any forests. They tried to explain what happened, but people just laughed. The Bridgewater Triangle, they'd say. It's just stories. But David knows the truth. The triangle isn't just haunted, it's a war zone. There are things in those woods, the Pukwudgies, the lights, the spirits in the water, and they are fighting for territory. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't the monster that tries to kill you. It's the realization that you were just a toy in a game you didn't know you were playing. The Freetown Forest is still there. The Pukwudgies are still watching. And if you stand on the Assonet ledge at night and look down into the water, make sure you hold on to the rail, because something down there is very lonely and it loves company.